as well as helping the senior themselves. And so it's just those 2 points had to be covered, because many children have told their parents, don't do a reverse mortgage because it's going to be bad for me and bad for you. So we had those were 2 of the most important things I felt in covering the issues.
Good points. And it sounds like you're practicing what you preach, using a reverse mortgage yourself. So your children are probably very pleased.
Well, what's interesting is, and this is something Dave Ramsey also talks to a lot of young people about, the debt snowball. And so when my 4th son, the last one to buy a house in March, called me up and said, hey, I just got done signing all the papers. We are the newest homeowners in the Minneapolis area, in Eden Prairie. And I said, congrats, Josh, that's pretty cool. And he said, yeah, Phil, we made us sign a lot of papers, but we're glad we got the money. And he's 31 years old. Him and his wife are 31 years old. And he said, hey, Dad, I just want you to know, today I started on my reverse mortgage. And I stopped for a second and was like, well, no, you're 31. And he said, well, Dad, like you always say, you're going to pay into your house, and then we're going to get all this money back when we're 62. Most people don't look at it that way. Mm-hmm. And Dave Ramsey should be educating young people on, get a house now, get a low rate, don't pay too much off, and you're going to get a refund of that money as your housing investment in the future, because a reverse mortgage will be waiting for you when you're 62. If my son can understand that, why doesn't a whole lot of 30-year-olds understand that?
Very good point. Now, you used the phrase in your NASDAQ column, beneficial foreclosures. And I know the word foreclosure is such a broad term because it doesn't quite fit with a federally insured home equity conversion mortgage. So would you explain to our listening audience and the public that's viewing this, what is a quote-unquote beneficial foreclosure?
When I was talking to him after the 2008 crash, and we knew, I remember telling him, man, we're over 10% foreclosures of the book, and this looks really bad, and what are you thinking? And he said, well, Harlan, relax a little bit, because most of those are beneficial foreclosures. And then I realized, after he explained it to me, my uncle had a beneficial foreclosure. He died at 94, feeding the birds in the backyard, lived in his house right up to the last minute. And he was upside down on his house. It was 2009, 2010, something like that. And he owed more on the house than what it was worth. But of course, FHA pays the difference, and none of that difference had to be done. So when a foreclosure, we ended up selling the house before it went into foreclosure. But if there would have been a foreclosure at of course, a loss, and that was on a short sale. But if it would have went further and nobody would have bought it, because there's not a lot of people buying houses and it was a really rough time after the 2008 crash, if that was foreclosed on, then that clears all of the debt, and there isn't any worry to the estate, to the trust, or to any of the heirs. His heirs got checks for divided up the $300,000 that he had in other assets. And so that is something that protected that other $300,000. If it would have went to foreclosure, there was no other obligation. So sometimes it's simply the logical end to wipe out the other debts. Maybe there was other things that could have come against his estate. There wasn't in my uncle's case, but there could have been. And that's a beneficial foreclosure because that client won. He didn't lose the deal. He didn't pay all the interest. He didn't even pay his closing costs. He came out ahead on the deal, and him and his heirs won. That was very beneficial for him to be upside down at the end because he didn't lose that money. And so when people say, well, that's awful that there was a foreclosure at the end, well, did it take care of mom and dad right up to the time that they dropped over, feeding the birds in the backyard? Yeah, it did. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. And the foreclosure is not something that is wrong or terrible, and it doesn't hurt the estate. It doesn't hurt the kids. It doesn't affect anybody's credit. And it's a logical end to a downturn in the market that protects the client. It actually shows that everything is working correctly. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that, and they said, I really don't want my parents to give up their house. And I said, well, let's think about this for a minute. He was a 30-something. And I said, if your mom and dad have a $500,000 IRA account and they spend $300 of it, what will be left at the end? And he said, well, 200,000. And I said, would you be okay with that if you only got 200,000, or would you be mad that mom and dad spent 300 of their $500,000 IRA? And he said, well, no, that's theirs. That's fine. I said, well, then what's the difference if they have a $500,000 house and they have to pay off a $300,000 mortgage at the end because they used that money and there's only $200,000 left for you at the end? Are you okay with that? He said, I guess that's the same thing. And it is. You just use a portion of your equity. You deposited money into a house. You took money out, and there's $200,000 left, and the kids get it at the end. And there's nothing wrong with using some of that. And I just talked to somebody this past month, and I said, do you want to give your kids the maximum amount of money when you pass away? Is that your goal? And they said, well, yes. And I said, well, I got to tell you something that you're not going to like. You need to die this year, because the best time to die is right now, because housing prices are at an all-time high, and so is the stock market. So the quicker you die, the more money your kids will get. Do you think that's a good idea? Well, obviously not. It's silly. So while you're living, there's something called the cost of living, and you pay money to live, and that means that if you live to be 95, your kids will get less money than if you die early. So that's what people get really confused on, and that's a long answer to a short question. But the bottom line is very clear. If you don't use all the money in your house, the kids get whatever's left. And that should be okay with them. And it should be okay with the general public. There was an article that was written in the New York Times a number of years ago that it was entitled, "The Kids Will Be Fine, Spend Their Inheritance Now." And there was a whole bunch of mean, nasty things that they came after this. Ron Lieber was the author, and they came against him and said, you might be a rich New York Times guy, but I'm telling you, I need my parents' inheritance. And it was like, wow, where did that entitlement come from? I think mom and dad have to be taken care of first. If there's money left over, then it goes to you.
Incredible, incredible. Is there any other comment you'd like to make about the column that you wrote?
Well, we'll probably follow up on some other things, because there's some space requirements, and Dan Hultquist, as you know, is constantly researching things and keeping an eye on what's out there. But we feel that there are so many people that could and should profit from the reverse mortgage, and they're staying away from it because they're getting the wrong information. And that's a tragedy. There is no reason why there should be $9.2 trillion sitting in people's houses when people are worried about whether or not they can pay for health care, whether or not they can take their grandkids on vacation, whether or not they can fix their roof, whether or not they can pay their taxes. And so the bottom line is that we are going to continue to do things at Fairway, and as Dan and I, as industry participants, to get the correct information out there. We post articles almost every month on our home.com, which a lot of people come to for information. And that is something that I think is a responsibility of all of us in the industry, is education. Because if we change that thought process, I always go back to the turn of the century. People said that horseless carriages were dangerous, and so was electricity. And there were some municipalities that even banned horseless carriages from going through and putting wiring in houses because it might cause a fire, which it could, of course, but most of us have wiring in our house now. Right. So we have to get the education out that electricity and horseless carriages and reverse mortgages are really okay.
Well said. Well, thank you so much, Harlan. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your motives and also the specific issues you addressed in your NASDAQ column. We'll definitely have you back again for a future segment, folks. Be sure to comment in the comment section below with any questions that you may have about this column or observations. We always enjoy your opinions and your thoughts, so be sure to do that. And if you would share this video with others on your LinkedIn profile, this interview, exclusive interview with Harlan, we'd always like you to do that, and you can do that on LinkedIn, Facebook, or your Twitter profiles. That wraps it up for another episode of HECM World Weekly with our special guest, Harlan Nicola.